And welcome to Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future, brought to you by the Kiwani Foundation. I'm Ahu Keikahu Cardwell, and here we are today on the windward side of Oahu. We have a wonderful guest, so let's go on over here and meet him. Alan, aloha.
How are you?
Good, how are you? Welcome to Voices of Truth. Alan Murakami, did I say your name right?
Yes, you did.
Wonderful, and tell us where we are today. Look at this beautiful scene in the background, Mount Olomana, huh?
You look out here, you could see that this was definitely old taro land. And in fact, just beyond and underneath that giant, I don't know what kind of tree that is, albizia tree over there.
Wow, yeah.
There's the foundation, cement foundation of an old poi mill.
Really?
That used to be the foundation for a small village of Maui that used to exist along the old Pali Highway.
Back in old times,
yes.
Huh? Now, Alan, you work for the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation,
Yes,
don't you?
yes.
And you're an attorney for them, yes?
Yes.
And Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation does what?
Well, we have a set of priorities that has been at the foundation of the organization for the past 35 years or so.
You give legal help to Hawaiians who otherwise couldn't probably afford
Absolutely.
this quality of legal help.
Well, back then, you know, some of the issues emerging centered around land, title, protection of water rights that still exist, the protection of traditional and customary rights that have been reaffirmed by the state of Hawaii as deserving of protection in our Constitution.
Yes.
And Hawaiian Homelands Project, for example, we have is trying to enforce the rights of Hawaiians that were established by Congress back in 1920 and passed on to the state in 1959. Many of these people affected by these rights and were deprived of some of these rights oftentimes had no access to the legal system. And because basically nothing was there to provide them that help unless you could pay for it.
Gotcha.
And there was no organization that specialized in any of these fields, which really took a certain amount of background and experience to really get astute about the principles that govern the protection of these rights. Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation emerged in the late 70s to assume that mantle, and under the tutelage of Melody McKenzie, Mahealani went, who now lives in Maui today after retiring, and under the principal legal leadership of Boyce Brown, who some of the old-timers will recognize as a name behind the Stop H3 movement back in the 70s. He was the initial executive director, went to OHAG, received a pot of money to help initially with the representation of Hawaiian families that needed to have protection in courts after major landowners bring these what they call quiet title lawsuits to try to determine title to major swaths of lands, primarily in the neighbor islands, but sometimes on this island too, and would otherwise just be there by themselves knowing nothing about the process, their rights, what to do, etc. And the corporation started out that way, and it slowly expanded into these other areas that I'm talking about. The protection of water rights, the protection of Hawaiian homeland rights, the protection of Kuleana rights. Things associated with those would be access, water, and then we eventually moved into, especially today with the pace of development, the protection of iwi kupuna from the development pressures that have been emerging.
Iwi kupuna being the ancient burial of the bones, human bones, human remains.
That's right.
And to protect those. So Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation has been around for a number of years.
78, 79.
78, 79. You guys are in the business of protecting and or restoring people's rights.
Yes.
That other people have either ignored, tried to take away, steamroll over, so on and so forth.
That's right.
And like you said, some of those most important ones are water rights, iwi kupuna, property rights, things like that.
Water rights and Hawaiian homeland rights under the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act of 1920, protection of rights associated with the use of kuleana, which is a very distinct area that associated with the protection of Hawaiian culture and traditions.
So at Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, you're one of the attorneys, aren't you?
Yes.
And so you're one of the attorneys that goes into court to fight for people's rights.
Essentially, yes.
Wow. And so what kind of cases do you argue before the bar?
Well, you know, that's what has been so unique about the corporation. They brought cases that nobody ever would have, or otherwise possibly defended in court if you were dragged into court by some other plaintiff.
So you guys kind of get the leftovers, huh?
Not the leftovers. I think these are just unaddressed areas that the legal system never paid attention to in Hawaii that are very unique, but yet very important to Hawaiians because that's the body of law that protects the essence of their tradition and culture. For example, a simple example, one of the first cases I took on as an attorney was the protection of Hawaiian families' rights to be properly notified in court. You know, a very discreet right, but often overlooked, and with a drastic consequence of basically trampling the rights of Hawaiian families that never even knew about the cases that affected their property rights, from their ohana's ties to Hawaiians that had these property rights in the past.
So in other words, they were losing cases because they didn't even know they needed to show up in court to
That's
defend
right.
it.
That's right. That's
Wow.
right. They were very clear from the time of King Kamehameha III, very clear rights that kuleana are guaranteed access. You cannot deny somebody with the legal right to a kuleana access to that kuleana simply because you're more politically or economically powerful.
Yeah.
And so to establish that principle, we've had cases to try to stop the abuse of this principle so that people could go back to lands like this. Typical kuleana looked like this in the old days,
Yeah,
but
just
because
like
you
this.
stop people from going in to work on it or to live on it, I mean, they look like that.
Right.
And
all overgrown.
that's right. And
Wow.
pretty soon nobody could get back to the lands that were in their families, and they'd move on to other areas because they couldn't fight the big plantations.
Yeah, couldn't fight the big guys.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
So we help in modern times those descendants of those owners to try to get back to that land, and we've had some very interesting cases.
I'll bet. So you guys are like the Davids going up against the Goliaths every
Right.
single day, right?
One of those cases, just to give you an illustration, we were able to enforce the access rights of a modern kuleana owner.
Uh-huh.
He happened to be non-Hawaiian actually, but very in tune with the Hawaiian culture, spoke Hawaiian, wanted to grow taro on the kuleana. And we were able to get access to that kuleana through haiku plantation, probably one of the most exclusive gated communities on Oahu. And when that land was developed by the Bishop Estate and sold to private owners, when they went to court to so-called quiet title, as I mentioned earlier, title that land so they could develop it, get the financing for the development, they had to reserve the rights of kuleana owners, acknowledging that they didn't own those kuleana. They were located within the larger boundary of that subdivision. And for decades, those rights had remained silent, unenforced. And when somebody tried to use those kuleana, you know, the gate stopped them and they didn't know their rights. So eventually, owners sold it to the client we represented. We told them, hey, you have a right to be there. And we actually got the right for that owner to go into that exclusive subdivision through the gated community because the traditional route had been paved over.
Wow.
So that's the only route that they could use.
Wow.
And to actually, because he had limited financial means, he dragged he cut up a house in two, moved it from Kapahulu, drove past the gate in Haiku Plantation, and moved the house into position to be built on
And
that
put it back
kuleana.
together there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Across the backyard of one of the owners who was very upset, but had to just swallow it because there was a road that led to this particular kuleana. It had been abandoned, of course, and grassed over.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that right and because of the legal recognition for that right, we were able to,
Wow.
I'd say at the consternation of the community association there, who would, you know, basically they had to sign papers that said they reviewed those exclusions and those rights that were reserved, had to stand by and watch, even after they called the police, that, you know, these guys have a right to be there.
Wow.
So this is like a kind of a stunning thing, and I thought one of the examples of how our organization was able to help somebody with limited means to simply get the rights to which they were entitled. Well, probably the single most case that we've taken that epitomizes what kind of work we do is the Namoku Aupuni o Ko'olau challenge to two state agencies' decisions that allow East Maui Irrigation, which is a subsidiary of Alexander and Baldwin, to take up to 164, not up to, but an average of 164, 166 million gallons a day, about as much as Oahu drinks every day.
Wow. So
From East Maui to Central Maui.
What you're talking about is somebody stealing somebody else's water, yes?
Well, it's hard to say that stealing because the state is allowing it,
see.
and they are the manager of it.
Really?
So we've been trying to educate the state to redirect that water to the people that have the rights to it under not only kingdom law, but the system of laws that every level or every successive government has recognized until today.
Wow.
And reaffirmed in our Constitution.
Wow.
That the traditional rights to water for taro growing and for the gathering in streams of opu, opai, hihivai, as well as the fishing on the coast that's fed by those streams, which is very important because it creates an estuary, which is essential to the life of fish that are important to everybody. Likes fish, including Hawaiians.
Right.
Those rights are protected under the Constitution.
I see.
And we're not supposed to allow diversions of water, especially off of state-managed ceded lands. And in this case, they're not only ceded lands across which these waters are collected, about 33,000 acres that, that the board controls,
right.
The Board of Land and Natural Resources, but these are former crown lands, which were a subcategory of the ceded lands that once belonged to the royalty after the Mahele, that were incorporated into the government lands that became the ceded lands upon the succession of governments to the current day. And so if you look at it, it's the special lands of the king that they're allowing 33,000 acres of which that the current Board of Land and Natural Resources is allowing to be taken off of those lands
to be
for use, diverted across 75 miles of ditches and tunnels built by EMI to service a plantation now run by HCNS, Hawaiian Commercial and Sugar, another subsidiary of Alexander and Baldwin. And they're taking it off the very lands that the king had in the old days for his own personal use and protection. Now, the king was very clear in those days of the Mahele. He wanted not only to give title to land, but he wanted to make those titles, the private titles, subject to the rights of native tenants to such things as water, because he recognized back then, and the law has reaffirmed this over and over, that you've got to give the kuleana owners access to the water so that they can continue their traditions, including the growing of taro, the gathering from the streams, and the fishing along the coast. And so that's been reaffirmed in our modern water law, and we've been trying to enforce that right for a good 10 years now.
So Alan, what got you interested in doing this, David versus Goliath battles, if you will?
Well, it wasn't, I wasn't consciously trying to do that, but the more I got through law school, I realized that my goal to try to become a public servant through representation of the government sometimes ran contrary to the interests of the people being affected by government actions. And a lot of them turned out to be indigenous people whose rights were, as in Hawaii, as I found out later on, often ignored, forgotten, and trampled upon. And in fact, in this case, that Namoku Aupuni case, the rights to water were completely being ignored. Oftentimes, these attorneys that come in representing the other side in our cases often say, hey, when we went to law school, you couldn't do these things. Why is it so different in Hawaii? What they fail to understand, and unfortunately the training in a lot of law schools outside of Hawaii ignore the fact that our body of law is very unique in the nation. And these special rights that were retained by the government to protect the interests of the common people, to things like water, to things like land, to things like the protection of the tradition and customs explicitly, in all kinds of forms, access to certain areas, were recognized and protected by the king and carried forward with every iteration of government that has occurred since the ancient days. The language is very clear. It doesn't say, we hereby now create these rights to respect the ability of Hawaiians to survive. No, it said we reaffirm those rights that were traditionally customary exercised for subsistence, cultural, and religious purposes. Subject to some regulation, but it was a very clear statement that they were not creating new rights, but reaffirming old ones that are contained in our body of law. And so, if we have a system of laws, we're supposed to follow it. It's a system of laws, not a system of men and women that are more powerful in our economic political system.
Yeah, what a very simple concept, but the system of law seems like it got eroded by the system of people.
Power.
Power,
politics.
money and power and politics over people's rights.
As you probably well know, sugar was king back then as
Yep.
tourism is now, and those industries oftentimes push their weight around, and government regulators, unfortunately, that, tend to ignore or overlook them, and that's our job, is to go back and say, hey, wait a minute, this is your job. You're supposed to be the neutral government entity to protect these rights that still exist, and especially for those least able to protect them. And you should be doing that. Don't listen to those paid lobbyists or corporate attorneys that come in and tell you to try to ignore all these other rights that these people do have. That was our job as I saw it, and that's what we tried to do. That's what I saw in law school, especially for indigenous people that needed to be protected and oftentimes went without any kind of advocacy. These people were voiceless under the system. It's as if government regulators had earmuffs. I couldn't hear them because they either couldn't show up or didn't know how to say things right before them, and therefore many of these rights were overlooked, ignored, trampled upon. They have a lot of resources on the other side. Alexander Baldwin, for example, is the 12th largest landowner in Hawaii.
Whoa.
They were a member of what they call the Big Five.
So that company's worth billions of dollars, right?
Yeah, I imagine so, in their
Yes.
asset base.
Yes.
It certainly has a huge economic footprint in Hawaii. The Big Five, as you may know, ran Hawaii for generations during
Yep.
the plantation era.
Yep.
And they've been sold and resold and now are owned internationally. But it's that legacy that has been carried forward in new faces, new people, new officials, new managers, but it's that presence still overrides many people's rights. And you know, it's like, yeah, sure, we're never going to equal the resources that they have, but the only power we have is to cite the law, and if we are a system of laws, to make the people who implement those laws honest, whether they be judges, managers, public officials that are in charge of regulating resource protection, such as water, or the protection of iwi kupuna, or the rights to access to land, to ocean and mountain areas that were also protected in the same way. You know, I've been with the corporation now about 28 years. You can see quite a bit of progress between the consciousness of people who make decisions on an administrative agency governing water, land, traditional rights, back then and now. In fact, there have been agencies created over that time to respect those rights that weren't in existence 28, 30 years ago.
Wow.
So there is progress. If we are a system of laws, we need to enforce the laws that exist. And even if they were ignored, remember them, especially when they affect people who are voiceless and powerless.
It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that.
So what attracted you to this? This is obviously your passion, because you could have joined a big name or high price law firm and made a whole lot of money as an attorney, commercial attorney, but you did this instead. How come? Why?
Well, I think law school exposed me to the effects of law on the powerless. That even despite the ability to enjoy the law that might protect certain people, if they don't know about it or they don't have the right voices in court or before agencies that make decisions, it doesn't matter. That made me think, well, what the hell am I doing in law school? I'm spending all these hours and it's really a trying time. What am I trying to get out of this? Am I going to do this so that I can go and work for those corporations and make the big bucks so that it pays me off, at least financially, to have gone through this rigmarole of law school training that drives out, you know, a third of the law school class in its first year?
Yeah.
Or do I go in to do something positive that makes me feel like I can go to sleep each night? People's lives, people's dignity, people's ability to stand tall were involved, and you can't measure that in dollars and cents, but it meant a lot to the development of the country, of the ability of the people without a voice to be able to stand up to big corporate interests, the ability to basically to enforce their own civil rights and attain their own human dignity. And then when I came here, it became that concept became more apparent to me in terms of Hawaiians, because they were losing their culture.
So that stuck out like a sore thumb to you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Wow. I grew up in Hilo, Hawaii. When I came back to Hawaii and I started working in this arena, in the first 5 years I realized that I was kind of a stranger to Hawaii in terms of my appreciation of the depth of Hawaiian culture and how unique this place was to the rest of the world, which everybody conveniently encapsulates in terms of, oh, this is the place of aloha spirit, so that's why it's so special. And really that captures it, but when people say that, they don't really understand what that aloha spirit means in terms of how vibrant that culture was, how it was able to sustain a people in isolation for 1,000, 1,100 years before any Western contact, and the ability to be self-sustaining in food production and everything else for those many generations. And we've lost the lessons of those, of that wisdom.
Lost that connection.
Yeah, the ability to live in that natural environment was really something I think was precious that we needed to draw from the culture. The way in which Hawaiians welcomed all into their ohana, oftentimes when it's not even their own kind.
Their own flesh and blood.
Yes.
Yes.
Was remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it led to a lot of their downfall, but it didn't change them as a people to have been victimized by their own aloha. But there's something really powerful about a nonviolent spirit that is of that nature. And I think Gandhi and Martin Luther King epitomized it, but Hawaiians as a people really, I think, also reflect that power.
Lived it for thousands of years.
You know, the power of love, the power of aloha.
Yes.
And it generates scenes like this.
Yep, it sure
and
does.
there's something about that connection that to me was so vital that nobody was really addressing. At the time I came out of law school in 1978, I went to Molokai for the first 2.5 years of my legal career, and I was just blown away. I said, I lived in Hawaii all my life, but I never knew people like this, because Molokai was the majority Hawaiian. I also went to Waianae after that, very similar. On Oahu, the only place where I think there's still a very predominant Hawaiian influence in the community, and I guess I was hooked at that point. And so it was a revelation to learn something about my own home state and culture.
Even though you'd lived here all your life.
Exactly, and I think that's true for a lot of my friends that grew up with me.
Wow.
Very isolated in terms of their familiarity and education about Hawaiian culture as a base for the fullness, the richness of their own lives as non-Hawaiians. Because I think everybody in Hawaii benefits from that cultural base, everybody. And so whatever I think can be done to retain that base really benefits the rest of us that I think feel something about that culture and how it's so special and unique.
So that must be why you do it, because you very clearly see that when Hawaiians win,
that's right,
everybody wins.
Absolutely.
Alan, do you ever think we're ever going to get to a point in time, a day, when it won't be a David versus Goliath anymore, it'll be more even?
Well, unfortunately, unless there's some balance brought to the reality of the market and capitalist system under which we live, there'll always be a certain power imbalance because money talks.
Yes.
But all of these efforts to try to reach the conscience of some of these capitalist titans, whether it's like whether they call it a third way, which Bill Clinton did, or the triple bottom line, which other people in Hawaii have been talking about, balancing not only profit or maximizing profit, but balancing profit with the greater social good of a company's operations, the green movement, for example. If there was truly an adoption of that in the spirit in which I've seen Hawaiians live, then I don't think there could come a day. And it's a constant process of education and reassessment, and I think education of the general public to understand how does this all fit together? How does it, what do I get out of it? Because you might be able to feel happy going to the shopping mall or something on Saturdays to enjoy whatever material things you can get from that, but where does that get you ultimately, and how does that contribute to the benefit of your kids in the future?
Yes.
Once people start to understand this, how everybody's linked together, how the culture, how the natural resources are linked in their lives to everybody else and their own lives and welfare, then I think you can see maybe a modification of that market capitalist system that will embrace some of the values of Hawaiians that would probably start to make a difference and tip that balance a little bit better. Because the sheer power of awareness by the public definitely helps Hawaiians in
Wow, I like
enforcing
that.
their rights.
I like that. The sheer Awareness of the public helps
Yes.
Hawaiians.
Yes, and that's why we're very committed in corporation to try to extend the public awareness of the rights of Hawaiians and try to get people to understand that their rights are of benefit to them if these rights are in fact enforced and observed
Right.
in the long run.
Right. And Alan, I know you're not going to give up, are you?
Give up what? It's not a matter of giving up. You know, it's just incorporated into my whole professional life.
It is your life, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is your passion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alan, thank you very much for being on Voices of Truth one-on-one with Hawaii's Future. It's been very inspirational
Okay.
to meet with you and talk with you today. Please keep fighting.
Well, please keep educating as you have.
If I do, you do, okay?
Well,
Got a
it's a
deal.
deal.
Wonderful. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on this special visit here with Alan in this beautiful taro patch, this lo'i here on the windward side of Oahu. Remember, you can watch us on the web 24/7 on voicesoftruth.tv.com. I'm Ehu Kahu Cardwell, and until next time, ahui ho! Mahalo for watching Voices of Truth one-on-one with Hawaii's Future. Watch us on the web 24/7 at voicesoftruth.tv.com. You'll find all our shows, including this one, in case you want to see it again or share it with family and friends. Also view our weekly video commentaries at freehawaiitv.com. And check out our blog, published daily, at freehawaii.info. It's all part of the Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.